So with Natlan's main story coming to a close, I think it's time to talk about Mavuika. Mavuika is probably one of the most controversial archons. I don't think an archon has gotten people to clench their buttholes this much since the Raiden Shogun. Yes, there were some people who were very vocal about their strong dislike of Furina, especially before Act 5 of Fontaine. But how does it compare to the player's reception of Mavuika? Honestly, from what I've been seeing, it's a pretty mixed bag. There's so much to talk about. There's Mavuika in her role as an archon and how she compares to the previous archons that we met. There's her role in the archon quest and also her own story quest. And most importantly, how does she hold up as her own character? Especially knowing that the archons are the backbone of the game in its current state. The archons of the Seven Nation is probably the most important set of characters right after the Traveler. So if an archon is not presented well as a character, it will leave a pretty big dent and will probably leave a bad taste in a lot of players' mouths. Before I begin, as usual, disclaimer, this is an opinion video. I want to talk about Mavuika because I like yapping about Genshin characters. If you're looking for a super objective take and well-structured video essay, you're in the wrong place. Get out. But if you want to listen to someone talk about Mavuika for no reason, then please stay. And of course, spoilers for most of Natlan and her story quest. So let's start with her background. What do we know about Mavuika? We know that Mavuika is indeed human. She was born in Natlan, specifically in the Science of the Canopy 500 years ago. And we learn through bits and pieces that she was a relatively normal but willful child. She grew up alongside Burkina, who you don't know is the companion of this big guy. She's also described to be a very responsible child, to the point that she actually helps her parents communicate and understand each other better. And as soon as her younger sister Hine was born, she was also a very good and reliable big sister. In Mavuika's character story 5, it describes how Mavuika's first real exposure to the harshness of war and the abyss is when her father won the pilgrimage. Despite it being a great honor, Mavuika noticed that her mother wasn't as thrilled as she expected her to be, and she realizes that this is because her father will have to participate in the Night Warden Wars. Her father fell in battle, but his team was victorious, so he was resurrected. But even when resurrected, his fatal injuries weren't magically healed. And seeing this, Mavuika had the drive and determination to end the war with the Abyss once and for all. This moment also earned her a pyro vision. And I think that's all we really know about her childhood and her days before she became an archon. Now, understanding her role in the archon quest is absolutely crucial to understanding her as a character. So bear with me a bit as we briefly recap a lot of Mavuika's moments in the archon quest. As soon as we arrive in Natlan, we're immediately told by Kachina that the Pyro Archon is human, and Natlan has had numerous Pyro Archons over the years, which is a stark contrast to the previous nations that we've been to. And she is indeed different. She is probably the first Archon that we meet that, one, is functional in their role as a leader, and two, is extremely welcoming towards the Traveler. And as the Archon quest goes on, Mavuika is shown to be a very capable leader. Like, she's very competent as an Archon. Whenever there's a crisis, Mavuika has the solution. Not only that, she's also clearly beloved and admired by her people, which makes sense. In Natlan, people have to earn the title of Archon. Being able to achieve Archonhood means that she has proven herself to her people that she's the strongest warrior in the land through the pilgrimage. So every Natlanese that we meet holds Mavuika in very high regard, and rightfully so. We actually first meet Mavuika in the Natlan Archon quest during the start of the pilgrimage. However, as we know, Kachina, who actually became one of the victors of the pilgrimage, went to the Night Warden Wars and fell in battle, and when Mavuika performed the Ode of Resurrection, she was unable to bring Kachina back, which shocked and probably terrified everyone for obvious reasons. And after that, we actually get to meet Mavuika and talk to her for the first time, because despite seeing her earlier during the beginning of the pilgrimage, this is actually the first time that we get to talk to her, and she was very welcoming, which is again pretty funny because the previous Archons that we met wasn't always as friendly, and the next one that we meet, I can't imagine to be this friendly or welcoming either. So anyway, Mavuika suspends the pilgrimage to investigate Kachina's disappearance, and she reveals there's been a lot of unrest in the Night Kingdom, which is also the main reason why she was unable to track down Kachina's location. She also reveals with the pilgrimage being suspended, they won't be able to produce contending fire, which is what keeps the sacred flame of Natlan alive, and the sacred flame is also their main defense against the abyss. Without that, Mavuika has to single-handedly figure out how to keep the sacred flame alive alive. They then come up with a plan to rescue Kachina while Mavuika deals with the fire. She reveals to Kenichi and Yansan that the true reason she wanted to suspend the pilgrimage is that the contending fire that it was producing was far from sufficient and Natlan is literally at its breaking point. So it's better for each tribe to just focus on protecting themselves against the abyss at this point. Mavuika plans to sacrifice her own power in order to keep the sacred flame burning. And like clockwork, the captain, aka the first of the Fatui Harbingers, suddenly attacked Mavuika. He challenges her under the guise that she is an unfit ruler and protector of Natlan. Something about how Mavuika fails to fulfill an oath that she made 500 years ago, and how he will usher in a new era and rules for Natlan. Mavuika is shown to be so strong that she was able to overwhelm the captain and she wasn't even using her full power. And up until this point of the Archon quest, you can tell that she's a very reliable leader. She's willing to sacrifice her own power in order to keep her nation safe. She's also strong enough to hold off the first of the Fatui Harbingers, which, as a refresher, the top 3 Harbingers is said to have powers rivaling the gods themselves, and the captain is the most powerful out of the 3, the most powerful after the Saritsa and the Jester. So Mavuika is very strong. Mavuika then expresses a great admiration for the first Pyro Archon and explain how he set the foundations for the Natlan that we know today, including how normal people like Mavuika herself can ascend into Archonhood. You also get to see Mavuika's family in a portrait that she keeps alongside various other mementos that she received from warriors of Natlan, including previous Pyro Archons. Mavuika greatly treasures her past. Even when she's long ascended into godhood, her family and her past as a normal human has always been a big part of her, and she keeps this part of her humanity very close to her heart, which probably explains why she has no problem engaging with the people of Natlan as if they're her friends, because she sees herself as the same human that she was all those years ago. Only now, she bears the responsibility of protecting the people of Natlan and the prevention of its destruction more than anyone. Mavuika, or to be more precise, the projection of her consciousness, also later on saves the Traveler and the others when they were trying to escape the Night Kingdom after saving Kachina. She literally breaks the sky of the Night Kingdom. This moment is also another showcase of just how strong and reliable Mavuika is as an Archon. Mavuika later reveals that she had to sacrifice her mementos, including her own family portrait, in order to save the Traveler and the others. It allowed her to get a temporary power boost because those artifacts contained contending fire. And Yansan actually showed a lot of regret because Mavuika had to resort to that in order to save them from the Night Kingdom. But Mavuika reassures her that the fallen heroes whom the mementos had belonged to would have been glad that their mementos were used to save the future heroes of Natlan. Mavuika clearly has a very deep understanding of her people, even ones who have passed away. She understands their desires to fight and knows that this is the right call for them to make in order to ensure Natlan's victory against the Abyss. She also reveals a very important detail about her own history, and Mavuika turns out to be the reigning Pyro Archon during the Cataclysm. So she was also the Archon who devised a plan with the heroes of the Sixth Tribe in order to finally defeat the Abyss. And as we know, this plan has been in motion for 500 years, up until present-day Natlan. Now, Mavuika is human. She doesn't have the same immortality as the other Archons. So to escape death by aging, she placed her own life into the sacred flame. This way, she was able to be reborn right when the plan was in full motion and Natlan was at its breaking point. This decision says a lot about who Mavuika is as a character. She, in her duty as a leader, was selfless enough to abandon her family and her old life in order to save Natlan. She waited for 500 years, going day by day, until finally the moment for her to be reborn arrived. Now, we need to keep in mind, in those 500 years that she waited, she didn't know if her plan was even going to work. It was still just a plan, but nonetheless, she sacrificed and left everything she knew and moved forward, only carrying hope and the burning determination to save her people and her nation from the Abyss. Fast forward a little, we learn that the reason the captain attacked Mavuika is because he disagrees with her ancient plan. He thinks that there's a better way and doesn't really want to wait around for 2 heroes to wake up before this plan can even really be in full motion. situation. He also suggests that Mavuika actually has a backup plan just in case her original plan involving the 6 heroes fails. He, like Mavuika, also understands the urgency and feels like it would be better if they just take matters into their own hands. For example, by using the pyro gnosis. But because the captain doesn't have the gnosis yet, the captain turned to the source mechanism from the Age of the Dragons to reconstruct Natlan's ley lines, in hopes that he will be able to save Natlan, which is something that Mavuika thinks is just as risky, so she inherently disagrees. Turning on the source mechanism also woke the Lord of the Night up from her slumber, and really long story short, she said she can fix Natlan's ley lines, but it would come at a cost of her sacrificing herself in the process. But of course, Mavuika refused this offer, which is something that the captain initially disagreed with. By doing this, it would potentially mess up everything in the Night Kingdom and the people of Natlan will suffer for it. During this conflict, Ororon woke up as the 5th hero, and because they're now down to only one more hero before the plan can be in motion, the captain eventually agrees that Mavuika's plan is indeed the safest. Around the same time, Citlali saw the future of the Pyro Archon and what she saw was death, so it turns out Mavuika's plan in using the power of the 6 heroes actually comes at a very high cost, and that cost is her life. This is because the power that Mavuika is planning to use is the power of Xbalanque, borrowed from the ruler of death, Renova. Fast forward to the war, and the last of the hero Chaska finally receives her ancient name, and Mavuika was finally able to use the power from the 6 heroes. And good lord, it was so strong it broke the sky and proved to everyone that Scaramouche was right all along. Anyway, Mavuika was able to destroy the Abyssal Rift and was able to hold off the invasion for a little while. Her next plan of action though is to dive into the Night Kingdom and relinquish the Abyss from Natlan for good. We have now reached Act 5 of the Natlan Archon quest. In Act 5, Mavuika says to the traveler that she plans to go to the deepest part of the Night Kingdom in 3 days. And if the traveler's ancient name isn't done by then, Mavuika would just go in by herself. While waiting for Shilonan to finish the traveler's ancient name, Mavuika suggests that they should relax and reveals that one of her hobbies in her downtime is actually painting. Mavuika suggests that they should relax and reveals that she actually does have hobbies. And after a feast with the people of Natlan, both Mavuika and the traveler head off into the Night Kingdom. Here, the final battle of the Natlan Archon quest takes place, and it was one hell of a battle against mainly this thing that I can't really pronounce, so I will just refer to it as an Abyssal Eldritch Dragon. During the fight against the Abyssal Dragon, the Abyss actually tried to sow some self-doubt into Mavuika, but this failed miserably. Like, she was not deterred at all. Like, not at all. She just kept walking, and with the support of the people of Natlan, Mavuika was able to defeat the Abyss. They returned to Teyvat and celebrated a bunch until we are reminded that Mavuika is still destined to die. We head to Natlan and we find Mavuika there alongside Renova and the Lord of the Night. Mavuika says the Lord of the Night is still weak and therefore the Abyss still poses as a threat, so she plans to throw her life force into the sacred flame again in order to sustain the Lord of the Night and the Night Kingdom, as well as to pay her debt to Renova. 2 birds, 1 stone. It's worth noting at this moment, Mavuika is also very adamant about shouldering this burden alone. Citlali even mentions that they can easily use the pilgrimage to sustain the sacred flame, but she still insists that the pilgrimage is symbolic of their struggles against the Abyss. And Mavuika no longer wants her people to still be tied to that constant fear and anxiety. Mavuika skillfully dodges the question about what she desires from this outcome and the unfairness of her inability to celebrate the war that she won. Even the Lord of the Night calls her out on this, but Mavuika remains steadfast in her decision to sacrifice herself, because to her, even if she was just an ordinary human as pointed out, she was still their leader. And to her, a leader is someone who is capable of making the right choices when it's time, no matter how tough they are. But at that moment, the captain swoops in, and to grossly simplify, he has a personal vendetta against Renova for being responsible for the curse of immortality. So he cornered her into forsaking one of her 2 rules, erasing the curse of immortality within him and then collecting his life as payment, or let the curse of immortality stand and absolve the debt that she came to collect. The captain basically stepped in, gave Renova the middle finger, and solved all of Mavuika's problems when he chose to merge his consciousness with the Lord of the night, preventing her from dying, and thus the Night Kingdom is all well and good again. And for the first time in 1,000 years, Natlan is finally at peace. So that concludes most of Mavuika's role in the Archon quest, which is a lot because, well, she is the Archon. Mavuika's role in the Archon quest can probably be summed up into 2 words, and that is reliable leader. But that isn't necessarily a good thing. While we've seen time and time again how reliable she is during the breaking point of Natlan and during times of crisis and even in the face of death, Mavuika was unshaken by everything. She remained determined, vigilant, and unwavering. In everything I just recapped for you in the Archon quest, not once have we seen Mavuika struggle or even have a moment of weakness. She obviously has emotional moments here and there. She grieves for her fallen companions, but it doesn't really affect any of her actions in the Archon quest. She had a plan, that plan was executed perfectly, and by the end of it, it all worked out somehow. The captain had a lot of potential to become a great villain, someone who would actually challenge her ideals and her ideology. He could have challenged her on what it really means to be a leader, to be an Archon. He was the perfect character for this, especially knowing that he was from Conria, whose nation was also destroyed because of the Abyss. He could have been such a great antagonist for Mavuika and the Traveler, and he was for like 30 minutes, and then they just decided to make him agree with her, and the reason for this was because they only had one other hero to find, so might as well. I genuinely think they fumbled that storyline. And for what? Because they didn't have enough time, but discussions about the captain and Natlan's overall story structure will be saved for a different video. Now back to Mavuika. I think this problem also bleeds into her story quest. Now Mavuika's story quest is more about the establishment and rebranding of the pilgrimage, but in itself, it was more about Xbalanque and the world of the Pyro Archons. I liked her story quest and I liked her dynamic with her own people and Xbalanque. It was fun and entertaining. Having one of the first of the 7 Archons meet the current one is probably one of the most fascinating things that can happen in this game, and to see them duel is even more interesting to me. But more on that in a bit. We spent most of the quest going around the different tribes and helping out the preparation for the pilgrimage. I think what the game is trying to do here is to hammer into our minds just how human Mavuika is and the many quirks that she has that we haven't seen before, because up until this point in the story, Natlan was at war, so as the Traveler, we didn't get the chance to see Mavuika in a more relaxed environment. The game does this by making a point that Mavuika has a playful side. She jokes around with the people of Natlan and her friends like Shilonen. She teases Yansan by calling her a coach. She finds it kind of funny that people are always nervous around her, and she also has a bunch of hobbies that she enjoys. She is also revealed to have a very healthy appetite. Shilonen also mentions that Mavuika can be horrible sometimes, we just haven't seen that side of her yet. And can I just say, I would have loved to have seen this on screen like in the quest. There is an interesting moment that happens during this conversation though, and it's Shilonen asking her if she was worried about Xbalanque's sudden appearance, as he is someone who's laid out the foundation for Natlan. He is the first Pyro Archon. So it wouldn't be too strange if Mavuika was nervous about someone like Xbalanque coming into the picture so suddenly. And to this, Mavuika says no, she's not worried, like at all. Now, all of this is reinforced by her character stories. She has always been an Archon that's really friendly to her people. Not every Pyro Archon is like this, but Mavuika has always found joy in mingling with humans because she is also human at the end of the day. She had a family, she grew up in one of the 6 tribes, she is a true child of Natlan. Like everyone else, she had a childhood and she became an Archon because she wanted to. Hold on to this. This is actually an important part of her character. Back to her story quest. We finally meet Xbalanque, and he's not exactly what we pictured him to be, but I think he's okay. He's pretty funny and pretty chill. The duel between Xbalanque and Mavuika is probably the highlight of this story quest, at least for me. And in the cutscene, we get this exchange between Mavuika and the Traveler. Mavuika is currently fighting the first Pyro Archon. This guy is part of the original 7 Archons. He was a victor in the Archon War alongside Zhongli, Venti, Ijiria, and Makoto. He is also the one who set the foundation for Natlan. He fought with the dragons and he made the deal with Renova. Xbalanque is, in concept, extremely terrifying. Even if he had only a fraction of his original power, he's still pretty damn terrifying. So the Traveler rightfully asked Mavuika if she had doubts in winning against someone like him, and she said no. Mavuika even manages to win against him. How? I don't know, I guess it just shows how strong she is as a warrior. The traveler asked her the same question again later on and she still had the same answer. She even added that in war, there's no room for doubts. Overall, her story quest was light and enjoyable. I personally enjoyed it and I loved being able to meet Xbalanque. But to me, more than anything else, it highlights my main problem with Mavuika as a character. She's too damn perfect. Now, there's a lot of things that we can consider to be traits of a great character in a story. I personally think it's a combination of their background, their growth, and the part that they play in the story. And if done well, all of those things will inevitably give you a character that either feels like they're a real human being with real emotions and relatable struggles, or someone who is larger than life, an enigma, if you will. And I feel like this is where Mavuika as a character kinda struggles. It's like the game wants us to believe that she is the human archon. She has a family that she cares for, she was a big sister, she lived a normal life, and even as an archon, as shown in her character story, she has pretty normal hobbies. She enjoys puzzles, and as we can see in most of the Natlan main quest and her own story quest, she is pretty hands-on with a lot that goes on in Natlan. Her people treat her with respect, obviously, because she is the greatest warrior in the land, but they are also not really too scared of her, and some even see her as a friend, especially fellow warriors. So obviously she is meant to be relatable, to be human, but I guess the game also accidentally kind of made her larger than life in a sense that she's a bit too perfect in everything that she does. Be it in her leadership, in her plan against the abyss, in her fighting capabilities, in her hobbies, she excels in every single one of them. There are dialogues from her story quest, specifically that one conversation with Shilonen that hints we've only seen one side of Mavuika, and that is charismatic leader Mavuika, but we have yet to see other sides of her. Shilonen even mentions that she can be horrible at times. I personally would have loved to see this, especially now that Natlan is not gonna implode. I think showing the more horrible sides of Mavuika would actually make her more relatable, because if the game only tells us what she is instead of showing us what she really is, then it's committing one of the biggest sins of storytelling, and that's telling but not showing, which is the same reason why Kokomi got clowned so much back in Inazuma. Characters in the game kept saying that she was this genius strategist, but we never really get to see any of it. It feels almost performative, and what's frustrating to me is that Hoyo knows how to write a human character. And not just that, they already did an excellent job of writing a human archon. More on that later though. So Mavuika as a character is weird because she's stuck in the middle. It's like they want her to be human, but they won't give her enough flaws to make her feel like an actual human. What makes up a human isn't just having a family or having hobbies. It's also having to be vulnerable in moments of struggle. It's having to feel happiness, anger, grief, and sadness. It's overcoming self-doubt. It's those kinds of experiences that I personally believe will make a character feel human because it gives them humanity. We've seen a lot of these in the other archons, most notably Furina, which is why to me Furina feels more human than Mavuika. Now I know we've had some material showing how Mavuika does struggle with grief and loneliness. She's not a husk, and I'm not implying that she's a husk. The problem here is that the emotions that Mavuika seems to be feeling isn't shown in her actions, nor does it impact the narrative. For example, Ace struggles with grief, and her grief literally caused her nation to suffer and become as isolated as she was. Furina's insistence, self-sacrifice, and determination on putting on a show for Fontaine is what drove her declining mental health and her own suffering. But she endured everything because she loved her people. Even Venti, someone who is closer to an enigma than he is a relatable character, is somewhat relatable in his grief. Venti's grief and moment of vulnerability in his story quest is what makes him feel like a layered character and makes him memorable. It's because despite him being this dramatic caricature, he still has layers to him. I think the one archon that they purposely let be larger than life is Zhongli, and rightfully so. He's the oldest and strongest archon. He probably has wisdom that rivals the god of wisdom herself solely because of the experiences that he's had in his long life. So you're not supposed to relate to Zhongli all that much. And that's fine because that's what his character is supposed to be. There's also no real growth for Mavuika in the Archon Quest 2. Like, one of the most important things that make up a great character is their growth within the story. You have seen some form of growth in the previous archons. I think most of the archons have shown some sort of growth, be it small or them making monumental changes. The easiest to point out is Nahida, A, and Furina. A was an archon struggling with loss and grief, and due to her actions, her own people had to pay for what she did. The suffering in Inazuma is directly caused by A's actions and flaws. Furina is also someone whose character growth is shown when she let herself step down from the role that she thought she had to play for 500 years, and finding purpose again while living as a normal human once Fontaine was free from danger. Nahida is an archon who had to grow out of her shell during the archon quest and after. Venti and Zhongli are a bit trickier. They're the oldest and they were also the first two archons that were introduced to the players. And they're also the most shady. Details about them as archons isn't really shown in the main quest and mostly comes from anecdotes found scattered in Mondstadt and Liyue. But from what we know, these two have gone through a lot of growth. It's just that it happened a long time ago. For example, Zhongli, he's the brute to Guizhong's brains, and that's how they built Guili Plains and later on Liyue Harbor. Zhongli was presumed to be someone who is more familiar with combat than he is with people, but when his best friend Guizhong died, he was forced to step up as Liyue's leader. And that happened in the Archon War. Zhongli remained as Liyue's direct leader up until the point that we meet him in the Liyue Archon quest. And in that quest, he actually feels that it's time for him to step down as an Archon because in the way that he sees it, humanity is ready to stand on their own. Venti is tricky because even though we see a lot of him, he's just a character shrouded in a lot of mystery that's obviously not going to be revealed until much later on, but he is, even in his current state, a flawed and complex character. So what about Mavuika? Mavuika has without a doubt endured a lot of hardships in her fight for Natlan. She had to wait hundreds of years for the day of the final battle against the Abyss and fate itself to come. She sacrificed her own life. She left everything she knew and she had to wait hundreds of years for the day of her plan to even arrive. So she has definitely, like most of the Archons that we've met, has endured a lot of hardships. And that's a great start. When there's hardships in a narrative, that's where usually we see characters grow the most. They grow because they need to overcome this obstacle. That is at least what happened with Nahida and Furina the most, at least in the Archon quest. Furina was in a different spot than Mavuika. She was not prepared to be tasked with saving her nation. She was unequipped, while Mavuika volunteered. I don't like making comparisons, but I think comparing her journey and role in the Archon quest with Furina can highlight why Fontaine felt like it had a lot more emotional impact, including why Furina felt like she was a more human character than the actual human Archon. The entirety of the Fontaine Archon quest is to show just how much Furina struggles, especially Act 5. She tries to keep it together, but everything is falling apart despite her best efforts. We see her cry and devastated when she thought she had failed her people. But it's not the crying or the emotional breakdown, it's her struggles that make her so human even if she's unbearable at times, especially in the beginning. And that's why when the game finally revealed what she had to endure, it will hit people a lot harder because they've seen the impact that it had on Furina. She was suffering every single day. She tried her best not to let it show, especially not when she's supposed to be this perfect all-knowing Archon, but it slips every once in a while. But in the end, she managed to play her part in Focalor's plan through sheer determination. It was flawed, she suffered greatly, but her love for the people of Fontaine helped her overcome those obstacles. Mavuika also had to suffer for 500 years. She had to give her life to the sacred flame, and then she had to wait by herself, probably engulfed in loneliness and feeling lost. You can probably argue that it's worse for Mavuika. Furina had to wait 500 years, but she got to wait in a palace with servants and people who worship her. But despite having all of that, Furina is still just really lost. She still struggles, even up until the point that we meet her in Fontaine. But once Mavuika was reborn 500 years after she gave up everything she knew, she is once again perfect. Or at least very close to perfect. It's like she already has everything figured out. if the suffering that she had to endure did affect her, it was surely not really shown on screen the same way they showed Furina's suffering. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be done the same way, I'm just using this comparison to highlight what's missing from Mavuika's story both in the Archon quest and in her first story quest, and that's vulnerability. There's not a single human on Earth that lives without a single moment of vulnerability, and unfortunately Mavuika has none of that, or at least not in the Archon quest. Even in the moments where she could have shown some vulnerability, she had the perfect badass comeback to it. Like in that moment where the abyss was trying to bring her down, but she just had this line prepared. Another thing that I think worked really well with Furina is the people around her constantly challenged her beliefs and her methods, especially near the end. Now, people probably did this because they just saw Furina's incompetence as an Archon, but the Traveler and Neuvillette challenged her up until the very end. They questioned if Furina's methods is really the only way to save Fontaine. And as the players, you also had the same doubts. Why is she still keeping secrets to herself when we know we're running out of time? Furina's determination was coming from a good place, but it can also be a flaw. Mavuika didn't have this moment. Now, you can argue why would people question her when she's such a capable leader? But isn't she supposed to be human? People usually can't question gods, but again, the whole thing with Mavuika is that she's supposed to be the human Archon. So I feel like the people of Natlan should have questioned her more. Yes, she has proven herself to be a very capable and a really strong warrior, but that doesn't exempt her from making mistakes. Because she's human, right? And humans make mistakes. If I were to pick one thing that gives a character humanity, then it's their ability to make mistakes and grow from them. It really doesn't get any more human than that. Again, she had this chance with the captain. He was the only person that really challenged her beliefs and her methods in saving Natlan. But again, he just weirdly complies after only 30 minutes of doubting her leadership. I guess another problem that stems from a character that feels close to perfect like Mavuika is that it can be harder for some people to care about her as a character. Knowing very little about Mavuika and also seeing very little of her struggles is what makes it hard for me personally to care that much about her. I like her, I think she's cool, but am I fully invested the same way I was to Nahida when I was in Sumeru? Not really. I think a lot of people cared for Kachina in the beginning of Natlan because they just showed so many different sides of her. Not just her vulnerabilities, but also what drives her as a character, and later on, even how she conquered her self-doubts with the help of her friends and the Traveler. Mavuika just didn't get that opportunity. I actually hope that we would have gotten that in Act 5 of Natlan, the same way Furina was also mostly fleshed out in the Act 5 of Fontaine, but we unfortunately didn't. Like I said, despite all that, I like Mavuika. I think she's an okay character. I personally wouldn't consider her the most human character or the most human Archon, but she isn't completely terrible or detached. We haven't seen an Archon that's actually involved or directly ruling over their own nation since Zhongli, and we only met Zhongli at the end of his term. Like, the Liyue Archon quest was about the end of his direct rule over Liyue. Well, Nahida does directly rule over her nation now. She started the Archon quest in a literal cage, and Furina was more of an idol than she was an Archon in Fontaine. But this doesn't mean that the previous Archons didn't rule over their nation. A still ruled over Inazuma through the Raiden Shogun puppet, and Furina was also doing her job as an Archon in her own way, but none of them actually ruled directly like Mavuika does. So it's actually a really nice change for once, and having the Traveler welcomed in a nation is also a nice change. Like, we were just chased around in Inazuma, Sumeru, and Fontaine, so seeing a reliable and powerful Archon is actually a breath of fresh air. Mavuika is also just really cool. She's really chill. While I've always been a believer that a good character will always need to have depth, and while Mavuika does to some extent, I also can just appreciate how cool she is and how chill she actually is as a person, and not to mention how badass she is in a lot of the moments in the Natlan Archon quest. She's also just able to connect with a lot of people and understand them. Her people love her. Just because she doesn't have the most distinctive personality doesn't mean that you can't enjoy her as a character or think that she's cool. I know that there's a lot of discourse about her aesthetics and Natlan's aesthetics in general, but personally for me, I don't really like the bike. It doesn't really bother me all that much either. Another thing that isn't completely Mavuika's fault as a character is that the previous Archons are just so damn memorable in their own way. So Mavuika being the normal and functional one can make it seem like she's boring or has no personality, when the direction was probably she was just a well-adjusted well-adjusted person. And if you actually look at her backstory, Mavuika should be a good archon in concept, like a competent archon. She voluntarily becomes an archon because she wants to end the war. So if she was too incompetent, it wouldn't make any sense. So Mavuika being a good leader is actually expected. Her people liking her and her being able to fully understand her humanity is also perfectly believable because she was human for most of her life. So if Mavuika had a storyline like A's where she completely missed the mark on what her people really needed, it wouldn't have been believable either. So other than complaining, I feel like it's also fair for me to voice out what I think the game could have done better. It's not a direct solution, but these are the things that I believe would have made Mavuika a better character. I don't think the problem is that she's normal. It's just, I think she would have benefited a lot from having some moments of struggles, especially in her journey as the only human archon. Without real moments of struggle, it's difficult to resonate with her as a human and as a character. To me, it feels similar to when I watch a strong female character in movies. Like, they're cool, they're pretty, and they're really strong, but relatable or human isn't something that crosses my mind very often when I look at them. Moments of vulnerability or struggles doesn't even have to be a complete mental breakdown. It can just be a scene where she admits she's scared for Natlan, that despite everything that she's done, it might not be enough, and even though she's an archon, she's also only human and there's only so much that you can do and save when at war. But she has to do it anyway and stand up despite her struggles, doubts, and humanity. Because her people believe in her, they genuinely love her and admire her, and they themselves have chosen her as their leader. Because her people recognize her strength. Vulnerability does not equal a mental breakdown. It can just be small moments of struggles where she questions herself, like in the animated short. I actually really like that animated short because there it shows Mavuika having doubts and struggling in her journey to travel 500 years into the future. She felt lost, and without her sister encouraging her, there's a high chance that Mavuika might have not made it. She was very close to giving up, and there was no tears, no emotional screaming, nothing. It was just silence and her sitting by herself. If we had gotten a few small moments like that in the Archon quest, I think it would have improved the quest and added depth to Mavuika. It's also unreasonable to expect Mavuika to have a mental breakdown the same way Furina did, because it wouldn't make sense for her character. Mavuika is strong both physically and mentally. She can endure more pain than probably your average person. So her having a sudden breakdown in the Archon quest or bursting into tears would just not make sense. So in a way, I actually do like that Mavuika remained composed throughout the war in Natlan. Also worth noting, in the animated short, we also see her actually getting kinda beat up and then being faced with so many losses. Mavuika in the animated short is the most human version of her that I've seen. But that's in the short. In the Archon quest, after she was resurrected, it feels like she has everything figured out. That vulnerability that we see in the animated short is not seen in the game, which is actually a problem that isn't exclusive to Mavuika. Genshin just has this problem sometimes. But I think to say that Mavuika has no flaws is also not completely accurate. She just has very few of them. One of the glaring flaws that Mavuika has is that she is very stubborn and idealistic. This is shown time and time again in her insistence to take on most of the war by herself. She is also very quick to dismiss her own needs and often is a bit too comfortable with just sacrificing herself for the greater good. So tying her sense of duty and obligation that weighs on her because her people genuinely love her to her tendencies to overlook her own well-being will actually make her a more rounded and human character. But I think in the Archon quest especially, all they did was that Mavuika felt like, okay, she's the leader, so she needs to do this, and there's no real personal reason as to why she has to do it for herself. But I feel like the game doesn't present her flaws like that. The way that she sacrifices herself is because she knows it's just for the greater good. And that's it. There's no real inherent personal reason to it. And this flaw is actually something that causes her to take on a lot by herself. Which is ironic because Natlan's most known saying is that you never fight alone. But that's what their Archon is constantly doing. So Mavuika is selfless and stubborn that she never even considered sharing her burdens up until the end. And is that really her biggest flaw? Because guys, I don't want to say that Mavuika is a Mary Sue, but having your one character flaw is that you're too selfless, it makes it kinda hard to argue against the Mary Sue allegations. I think Mavuika as a character will also have benefited greatly had she had deeper moments with other characters. Most of the interactions in the Archon quest that she has is very surface level, and while yes, they're in a crisis and they can just sit around and have a heart-to-heart, but it's actually also kinda the perfect time. If Mavuika had felt scared or had doubts about the outcome, she could have confided in one person. And if she wasn't completely able to share that burden with anyone from Natlan, she can do it to the Traveler. The Traveler's role in the Archon quest is a topic for a different video, but I think they missed a really good opportunity to show more of Mavuika's humanity through the Traveler. For example, like Frina confiding in the Traveler because he's a descender, or when Zhongli shares why the Traveler being a witness was so important to him because the Traveler to Zhongli is someone who transcends the laws of Teyvat, hence they don't have the same limitations as the Archons do. So it would have made perfect sense if the Traveler and Mavuika shared more of a deeper bond, the same way the Traveler shared a deeper bond with every other Archon that we've met. And it doesn't have to be fan servicey, it can just be a nice friendship moment. But I feel like Mavuika just had everything figured out from day one, and even if she did struggle, she overcome it by herself, and it happened extremely fast. Deep emotional connections to friends and family are all very human experiences. It's what drives most people, and I will give credit where credit is due. I do think the way that they show the people of Natlan holding Mavuika in high regard as something that's good. I do like that we get to see both playable characters and NPCs expressing how important Mavuika is to them as a friend and as a leader. The foundation is already there, it's just that we lack moments of real connection between Mavuika with the other characters. I feel like the time that we spent trying to forge the Traveler's ancient name that never really went anywhere would have been better utilized to have more character moments. Especially considering that Natlan's motto is that you never fight alone. So why is it that Mavuika is so capable of fighting alone? She has 6 heroes that essentially doesn't do anything for her other than allowing her to borrow some power, which is kinda disappointing to me because the 6 heroes of Natlan could have acted as Mavuika's advisors. Like each of them could have contributed something to help Mavuika in fighting the Abyss and as a leader. Unfortunately, that never happened. I think the most common theme of the Archons is that they all have experienced immense loss and grief. This applies to all of the Archons that we know. Most of them have lived very long lives and have shown moments where they had to grieve for someone who was very important to them. For Venti, it was the Nameless Bard. For Nahida, we see her grieving for Rukadevata. A struggled to overcome the grief of losing her sister for over 500 years. Zhongli has had to say goodbye to most of the people in his life because either they died or because of erosion. So having Mavuika mourn over the fact that she had to give up her family and her life as a human would have been such a good scene and a good character moment. She has touching moments with her sister, but it's more like she looks back on these memories fondly and has no regrets because saving Natlan and ending the war was what she had always wanted to do, which is fine. Most of the Archons have accepted their fate, but they do it clumsily. Even A had to isolate herself for 500 years, and Venti had to cope by using his friend's form in order to honor him. Mavuika seems to be perfectly at peace because it was her duty. Seeing her expressing a bit of sadness and loss would have made her feel more human to me because grief is just something that doesn't go away that easily. Another thing that I think would have benefited her as a character is for her to have made some mistakes in the Archon quest. Like every human on Earth makes mistakes. It doesn't have to be something catastrophic. It can just be something that challenges her ideals or her decisions. The captain's reaction to her plan actually had the potential to do this, which is why I was disappointed that it never really led to an actual conflict that served as growth for both characters. Mavuika didn't get the chance to be really challenged outside of one conversation that they had, and of course their duel. Her being responsible for a plan that took 500 years to execute had a lot of potential to be an obstacle for her character. I just wished her plan didn't go as smoothly. I feel like they could have made her more stubborn because, you know, she's the Pyro Archon, so if she were hot-headed and stubborn, most people probably wouldn't mind that, but she doesn't have to be this hothead. She can just be stubborn because she has this burning determination and will. And her being stubborn could have led to her not being able to see the flaws in her own plan. And it could escalate to the point that she couldn't see what sticking to her plan might have meant for her people and the war. Especially since she was also insistent on trusting the YUP to find the 6 heroes and not meddle in the process. And the captain could have been the one who really challenged her on this, making her see that maybe her grand plan isn't working out and they are running out of time. So this could have forced them to truly figure out a way to work together in order to save Natlan. But that didn't really happen. Everything just works out for her. And to me, that just makes it feel even more inhuman because she got everything right and did everything right. And while again this cements the fact that Mavuika is extremely competent as an archon, it doesn't make her the most human character. One of the things that bothered me is also how Mavuika seems like she isn't scared of death. Humans can accept their fate, especially if they know that their time is running out, but it's rarely smooth sailing. Death is something that most humans are afraid of. It's just human nature. And for Mavuika, she doesn't seem to be scared of it at all. Yes, she's brave and she's probably not showing it, but that's the thing. In order to make her a more believably human character, they actually need to show these moments. If she's scared of dying and losing the chance to spend precious moments with her loved ones, it will make her so much more human than she is right now. Admitting that she didn't want to give up her life for the sacred flame a second time, or that she's afraid in moments of crisis, won't translate to her being weak. We've already seen that Mavuika is anything but weak. Admitting that she wanted to celebrate the war that she had won with her people instead of having to give up her life again would have made her incredibly human. So I'm pretty sad that she never had that moment. But since she is an archon, there's a very high possibility that we get a second story quest. So I do hope that Hoyo can redefine what it actually means to be a human character for her. And it's not just about hobbies or appetites or having friends and family. Okay, so in conclusion, I personally feel like she's an okay character. She's definitely not as bad as some people are making her out to be. She's just more normal and less dramatic than the other archons, which is fine for me personally. It's just that I think Hoyo could have handled their execution of her story as a human archon a lot better. I think that's all I have to say about Mavuika, at least for now. I will probably make a video about other stuff that went on in Natlan in the future, hopefully soon. Let me know what you think of Mavuika in the comments. Do you love her? Do you not care? Just let me know what you think. And I hope everyone had a great New Year's. I'm kind of late, but better late than never, right? That's it for now, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!